It's August 6th, 2024. Two Russian K-52 helicopters are scrambled to repel the Ukrainian cross-border operation of unknown scale.
Ястреб, это борт 32. Мы с 45-м на рубеже обнаружили бронегруппу севернее Суджи, 2 километра вдоль трассы. Визуально 2 танка направо. Подтверждаете цель?
Борт 32. Цель подтверждена. Работайте попарно.
Борт 45, я беру левый. Пуск 1. Принял. Забираю правый. Захват. Пуск. Техника поражена, уходим по маршруту Север-3.
Helicopters quickly locate and destroy two tanks, which were still on tank transporters near the city of Sudzha. Satisfied with the outcome of their strike, the crews veer off into horizon, unaware that they had just obliterated the only Russian armor sent to hold the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk in its tracks. Whenever it comes to discussing the Kursk Offensive, most accounts begin with how exactly Ukrainian forces crossed the border on August 6, 2024. As much as we want to get to that, we must first turn to operation almost no one heard of, codenamed Seneca. Operation Seneca began on July 27, 2024, with a single objective: to prevent Russian forces from discovering when and where Ukraine would launch its next major offensive. At least 4 Ukrainian psychological and information warfare centers, reporting directly to the Unified Special Operations Command under Brigadier General Alexander Trapak, began meticulously simulating heightened military activity in the Kharkiv region, where Russia had launched its own offensive back in May 2024. Ukrainian operatives used mobile speaker systems to broadcast the sounds of heavy equipment movement at night, transmitted false information over unprotected mobile networks, and deployed radio emitters to mimic various military signals. They also scattered decoy equipment across the landscape. To conceal the actual redeployment of the 80th Air Assault Brigade to the border, an operation that, if detected, could have alerted the Russians to the imminent offensive, a narrative was introduced claiming that the 88th Mechanized Brigade had already been training there for months. This unit, like the 13th Yager Brigade, never existed. Ukrainian forces had simply simulated their activity on the border for months to obscure the timing and the scale of real build-up. The deception was so effective that the Chief of Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, dismissed all intelligence reports warning of a possible Ukrainian advance from the Sumy region, and instead redirected his attention towards Kharkiv. All these efforts carried out under the first phase of Operation Seneca secured for Ukrainian forces the element of surprise, without which none of what followed on August 6th would have been possible. The same can be said about the author of the operation. In 2024, Alexander Syrsky, known as the man behind Ukraine's lightning offensive in the Kharkiv region in 2022 and defense of Kyiv, replaced Valery Zaluzhny as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine. One of the reasons for that was clearly an unsuccessful 2023 southern counteroffensive, which we covered together with all other above-mentioned operations in our previous videos. Syrsky stepped into the role when the brutal battles grinding on in Donbas didn't just continue, they escalated. Despite suffering staggering losses, the adversary pushed forward, tree line by tree line. After one of the last pre-2022 strongholds, Avdiivka was lost. With Pokrovsk now under threat, Russian troops weren't just tearing through Ukrainian defensive lines, they were also significantly eroding morale. In May 2024, they even opened a new mini-front line, starting an ultimately unsuccessful offensive in the Kharkiv region, which yet further reinforced the widely accepted idea that Ukraine, unlike Russia, is unable to take back initiative and advance. Syrsky's first and foremost goal was to prove everyone wrong in this regard. He began preparations for a new advance in March 2024 by analyzing what had gone wrong with the previous summer offensive. Undeniably, the biggest issue was the location of the attack, likely the most heavily reinforced sector of the front line in the Zaporizhia region. For the new operation, Syrsky ultimately concluded that the static nature of front line in Ukraine allowed only limited gains at high cost. Therefore, the strike would need to be aimed directly at Russian territory. Second, operational security must be at the highest level, meaning that everyone from most of Ukraine's general staff to all Ukrainian allies should remain completely unaware of the operation's existence or any other details. Third, the execution of such risky plan can be only entrusted to the most experienced and mobile Ukrainian units, which will receive the best drone, air defense and aviation support. Therefore, Syrskyi forms the spearhead of the attack out of the 80th, 82nd and 95th Air Assault Brigades, which are secretly deployed to the Sumy region for the initial breakthrough. These are reinforced by the 33rd and 225th Assault Battalions, Syrskyi's experimental units designed for aggressive attacks, as well as more conventional 22nd, 61st and 116th Mechanized Brigades, 2 reconnaissance and 1 artillery battalion, the 8th Special Operations Regiment, the 5th Omega Special Operations Detachment, SBU Alpha Group, 2 newly formed Special Purpose Regiments of Rangers, along with a few extra battalions and TDF brigades. Altogether, this brings the total force to somewhere between 10 and 15,000 men, as many units mentioned are not deployed in full force due to continuing combat in other parts of the country. Drone support is provided by the 14th UAV Regiment, Flying Skull, Project M2, Requiem Group, and Horn Group UAV units. In June, the Ukrainians also formed the 49th Separate Assault Engineering Brigade, specifically for breaching heavy fortifications, along with the already existing 48th Engineering Brigade and 808th Support Brigade, again keeping in mind the previous offensive, which was stalled by minefields and other defenses. Despite the fact that the border between Ukraine's Sumy region and Russia's Kursk region is chosen due to relatively light fortifications, crossing it is by no means easy. The Russians have thoroughly mined it, set up multiple observation checkpoints, dug anti-tank ditches, laid lines of dragon's teeth, and established regular drone patrols and camera posts. Between 5 and 15 kilometers from the border lies the main Russian defensive line, protecting the sizable city of Sudzha, the administrative center of Sudzhansky district. More importantly, however, is the question who is defending it. Around Sudzha, the Russians have concentrated the 308th and 488th regiments, each fielding 2 battalions, mostly deployed along the main rear defenses alongside local OMON units, a special police branch of the National Guard of Russia. Closer to the border, alongside border guards and conscripts, is the 1434th Motor Rifle Regiment Ahmad. To the south, the same regiment also holds large parts of the border, supported by the 13th Tank Regiment, FSB Special Operations Center operatives, and the same border guard and conscripts formations. Another unusual unit, thinly spread across the area, is so-called VKS Motor Rifle Regiment, composed of personnel from the Russian Aerospace Forces. Various engineers, mechanics and flying staff who are now used as an assault infantry due to shortage of manpower. To sum things up, Alexander Syrskyi, just as he did in 2022, has identified a stretch of the front line defended by relatively few adversary units, and notably commanded by the notorious Alexander Lapin. Despite this, Russian advantages remain in place in form of the landmines, fortifications, air power and artillery, including elements of the 236th Artillery Brigade and the 275th Self-Propelled Artillery Regiment. Though stretched thin across the region, these units still field 13 MLRS systems, 98 artillery pieces and 71 mortars. On top of that are FPV drone crews, now operating brand new fiber optic drones, immune to signal jamming or interference from obstacles. So, the Ukrainians are under no illusion that the operation will be easy. Yet, after Syrskyi personally visits most of the units and explains how different their mission will be from all previous operations, the soldiers are determined to bring the war back to Russia by punching through its weakest spot. The first ones to cross the border at the beginning of August are Special Operations Forces. They infiltrate covertly and demine narrow pathways, as well as do the final assessment of the Russian fortifications and patrols. This information is crucial for further attacks. On August 3rd, 3 days before the incursion, elements of the 80th Air Assault Brigade covertly infiltrate the border up to 500 meters deep. The soldiers cross in the groups of 6 to 8 people with 2 special operations operatives leading each group through already demined pathways. In this way, covertly concentrating up to 70 soldiers behind enemy lines for sabotage and reconnaissance. On August 6th, the main operation begins in the early morning. Ukrainians launch coordinated drone and artillery strikes, while the armor of the 80th Air Assault Brigade, with a new triangular tactical symbol, rapidly breaches the Sudzha border checkpoint. Under relentless tank and artillery fire, the entire Russian garrison at this checkpoint surrenders. Photos soon emerge of a fully Russian platoon walking towards Ukrainian border with raised hands. The first visible sign that something significant is underway. However, Ukrainian forces strictly adhere to orders limiting the release of footage, so apart from Ukrainian high command and Russian troops under direct attack, few realize that a major new offensive has begun. This is not a coincidence, but a second phase of Operation Soneka, as Ukrainian psychological information warfare centers carefully highlight Russian missteps but leave a lot of room for confusion and speculation by controlling what footage is released. They also place emphasis on the huge number of conscripts that are captured, immediately forcing Russia to ask for renewal of prisoner swaps, as well as destroy the reputation of praised Chechen fighters. Major General Abtialo-Udinov, commander of the various Chechen Akhmat formations in the area, quite literally plays alone, publicly claiming that the border remains secure while quietly withdrawing his forces to the second defensive line. These actions further ruin the cohesion of defenses and result in even more losses. East of Nikolaevo-Dargino, Ukrainian engineering units equipped with UR-77, American M58 Mykliks, Vincent 1 MCs and Biber bridge layers from the 48th, 49th Engineering and 808th Support Brigades actively carve paths through the Russian defenses. The armor of the 225th Assault Battalion is the first to push through these breaches. They are immediately followed by the mobile striker APCs and MRAPs of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade and the 22nd Mechanized Brigade. While the 82nd spearheads towards Zelený Shlyakh, the 22nd and 225th systematically clear Russian positions in and around Nikolaevo-Dargino and Dargino. Using forest cover to their advantage, Ukrainian tanks eliminate enemy dugouts, while infantry are dropped by Humvees behind Russian fortifications, taking prisoners in the process. Simultaneously, Ukrainian forces begin breaching the border near Gordievka and south of Oleshnya, forcing the adversary to stretch its forces even further. The Russian response, while quick, is disorganized. Russian FPVs and Lancets focus on the immediate incursion zone, unaware that Ukrainian forces are already advancing deep into the Russian territory with minimal resistance. The Kremlin downplays the situation too, describing the offensive as a minor sabotage operation that was already contained, further adding to the confusion. As border troops surrender or flee, among them a significant portion of the supposedly elite 1434th Motor Rifle Regiment Akhmat, Russian aviation is the first to meaningfully engage. However, as during the Kharkiv counteroffensive, Ukrainian advances are so rapid that it's impossible to properly target the airstrikes. As a result, Russian attack aircraft drop munitions indiscriminately, dealing minimal damage to Ukrainian troops. Helicopters like the K-52s and Mi-28s are supposed to be more effective in these circumstances, but they also fail to land effective hits. In a landmark moment, one Mi-28N is shot down by Ukrainian FPV drone, marking the first recorded instance of this type of engagement in this war. In a more conventional manner, using manpads, Ukrainians also shoot down one K-52 helicopter. Ironically, the only confirmed achievement of the Russian army aviation on August 6th is the destruction of two of its own T-80 BVM tanks, highlighted in the beginning of this video. With their defenses visibly collapsing and panic spreading, the Russian command turns to the last resort measures. Iskander ballistic missiles are fired in a desperate attempt to hit Ukrainian columns. One strike near Zelený Shlyakh manages to target the column, causing some damage which yet hardly stops the advance. Another strike using two more missiles destroys a single Buk SAM system near the border. These disproportionately expensive and poorly targeted attacks, firing 9 million worth of ballistic missiles at individual vehicles, underscore the Russian leadership's desire to maintain the illusion of control, rather than mount an effective response to the unfolding breakthrough. On August 7th, the 82nd Air Assault Brigade has already crossed the main Russian defensive line, wreaking havoc behind enemy lines. The 225th Assault Battalion catches up with it, while its positions are taken over by forces of the 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade, with the support from the Georgian Legion. Elements of the 22nd Mechanized Brigade are swiftly redeployed to the eastern flank of the breakthrough. At the same time, the 80th Air Assault Brigade pushes towards Sudzha. Ukrainian forces also cross the border, south of Oleshnya, with the elements of the 116th Mechanized Brigade, encircling the village. Here, the breakthrough is not easy, as Ukrainians take some losses, but eventually pathways for vehicles are demined and cleared. Similar to the 82nd, the 80th Air Assault Brigade surges forward, smashing through the Russian main line of defense and entering Sudzha from the west. Its advance is well coordinated with the other two brigades to the north and south, allowing Ukrainian forces to approach the key city from three directions. While the 22nd Mechanized Brigade ties down Russians in Kazachya Loknya, the 116th advances through the fields and approaches Sudzha from the south. The Russian city garrison, completely disorganized and under relentless attacks from multiple sides, retreats in disarray to the eastern part of the city. Meanwhile, the 82nd Brigade, advancing near Novoivanovka, splits its forces and pushes both to the east and west. Near Malaya Lognia, they continue to catch Russians by surprise and destroy them, but the attack on Korenevo is thwarted. This is due to the Russian reinforcements, an additional battalion of VKS Motor Rifle Regiment, deployed just in time to repel the determined but not numerous Ukrainian assault. Despite that, Ukrainian forces in many places reached the road between Sudzha and Korenevo, effectively joining multiple breakthroughs into a single salient. Russians continue wasting Iskander ballistic missiles, trying to hit advancing columns, but achieve only misses after misses. Landsat drones are much more successful in hitting Ukrainian vehicles, but they are mostly used near the border and not at the spearheads of the Ukrainian attack, indicating that the Russians still lack situational awareness. Another sign of that is the Chief of General Staff of Russia, Valery Gerasimov, reporting to Putin and the public that the Ukrainian advance has been completely stopped. This statement is not going to age well.
Ударами авиации, ракетных войск и огнем артиллерии продвижение противника вглубь территории на Курском направлении остановлено. В настоящее время подразделения группировки «Север» совместно с пограничными органами ФСБ России продолжают уничтожать противника в районах, непосредственно примыкающих к российско-украинской границе.
On August 8th, the 22nd Mechanized Brigade crosses the river near Sudzha and catches up with previously routed elements of the 488th Motor Rifle Regiment, forcing them to retreat back to the eastern part of the city. Now in control of the main supply line to Sudzha, Ukrainian forces capture most of the city, with only a small contingent of defenders encircled behind the river. The Ukrainian plan to swiftly cut through the Russian defensive line and seize the main part of Sudzha worked perfectly, but the key question now is, what's next? Apparently, Syrskyi understands that the forces under his command are not just fighting the Russians, they are racing against time. The enemy will inevitably raise its situational awareness and bring numerous reinforcements, which will soon curb the lightning-fast Ukrainian advance. Before that happens, Ukrainians must secure as many favorable positions as possible. Anchoring their defenses on two major cities, Sudzha and Korenevo, both situated next to rivers that serve as natural defensive barriers, appears to be the next logical goal. Accordingly, the 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade and the Georgian Legion begin their advance westwards, reaching Snagast. A portion of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade initiates a second assault on Korenevo. Although they manage to gain foothold on the city's outskirts, the advance halts due to the size of urban area and the arrival of reinforcements. Here, Ukrainians simply lack the manpower to replicate the skillful encirclement seen in western Sudzha, and as a result, Korenevo remains under Russian control. Meanwhile, another element of the 82nd Brigade advances east of Korenevo, reaching as far as Kromsky Byki. Following the fall of western Sudzha, the 80th Air Assault Brigade, supported by auxiliary units, advances along the main road, reaching as far as Bolshoye Soldatskoye. There, they encounter Russian reinforcements and are forced to regroup to Martinovka after intense combat. Despite this first sharp check, Russians are still unable to effectively blunt Ukrainian mechanized assaults with their own armor. Most of the footage of arriving reinforcements show more Lov vans than tanks and BMPs. One of the first, if not the very first, Russian units redeployed to Kursk from Donbas is the ex-DPR 15th Spyatnashka Brigade. However, this rapid redeployment is marked by the usual Russian recklessness, leading to the catastrophic losses. During the night between August 8th and 9th, drones of the Horn Group spot the Russian convoy near Orilsk, and Ukrainian forces immediately strike it with HIMARS. As a result, 8 trucks full of Russian soldiers are destroyed before even reaching the front line. By some accounts, the losses constitute at least one whole battalion of troops. On August 9th, a significant number of armored vehicles, currently in rather short supply, arrived to Bolshoye Soldatskoye and Belitsa. Exactly from Belitsa, Russians launched their first full-fledged counterattack. The road leading towards Sudzha had previously been remotely mined by Ukrainian drones, but the charges were set to activate after 48 hours, meaning that by August 9th, they had effectively expired, reopening the route. An additional attack on Martinovka is easily repelled by Ukrainian paratroopers. However, while they're engaged there, the southern flank begins to falter as Russian columns enter Goncharovka and nearly succeed in deblocking the Sudzha garrison. This success proves short-lived. Ukrainian forces quickly redeploy elements of the 61st Mechanized Brigade to the area, retake Goncharovka and rout the Russian attackers. The road is mined again to prevent further breakthroughs, and a significant portion of the 61st Brigade remains in place to secure this flank of Sudzha. Meanwhile, Ukrainian assaults on Korenevo failed to achieve results. Russian forces continued to hold the central part of the city, along with key bridges, preventing an easy encirclement. Overall, the battles in the Kursk region show that Ukrainian forces have succeeded in establishing solid positions in most of the areas they infiltrated. However, Russian forces are also clearly stepping up their efforts, eager to mitigate the humiliation of being invaded after 2.5 years of attempting to conquer Ukraine. On August 10th, Russia redeploys the 810th Marine Brigade from Donbas in full force to the southeastern part of the salient. However, instead of trying to cut Ukrainian forces off from the border, they now concentrate on pushing them back in the area of Martinovka. Meanwhile, Ukrainians are conducting assaults on Kruglik. The clashes in both villages are brutal, though the Russians are using fewer vehicles in an attempt to avoid losing their limited and valuable equipment. Fierce fighting also erupts around Plekhovo, where Ukrainians have quickly secured the western bank of the Psel River and are now working to ensure that the repeat of yesterday's flank attack on Sudzha does not occur. The assaults here are supported by Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, which face Russian colleagues, in particular from Elite Senior Special Forces Center. The situation around Korenevo remains largely unchanged, despite reinforcements arriving from the fraction of the 22nd Mechanized Brigade. The rest of the brigade continues to defend Martinovka, while the fresh forces of the 95th Air Assault Brigade are deployed to the area of Malaya Loknya and Pogrebki. Ukrainian paratroopers clash with 9th Regiment of 18th Motor Rifle Division, which is half encircled in town since the beginning of incursion, and is eventually completely wiped out. There, they also managed to shoot down Russian K-52 helicopter using manpads. Overall, the effectiveness of Russian aviation and helicopters remains low, even after the front line has begun to stabilize. There is almost no evidence of successful strikes, except for the following case. In this footage, we can see how the Russian K-52 uses 2 laser beam riding anti-tank Vikhar missiles to accurately take out 2 trucks on the road. This is an impressive result and a great demonstration of the modern tank helicopter capabilities. The only problem is that these 2 trucks were taken out earlier by the drones of the 225th Assault Regiment and abandoned. And yes, these 2 belong to Russians, who hastily retreated to Korenevo in the first 2 days of the Kursk Offensive. In contrast, multiple videos show Ukrainians successfully evacuating damaged equipment, signaling that their logistics are holding firm despite the drone-heavy battlefield. This is no accident. Nearby, the newly expanded 170th Logistics Regiment, formerly a battalion and now a key part of the Air Assault Corps, is actively supporting the operation. On August 11th, the focus remains on Martinovka, where Russian Marines relentlessly attack positions held by the 22nd Mechanized Brigade. The village changes hands multiple times throughout the day, with Ukrainians ultimately prevailing despite coming close to being cut off in nearby Kruglik. Multiple sources also report that Ukrainian forces cross the border near Goptarevka. However, given the complete absence of photographic or video evidence of such breakthrough, this too was likely a psychological operation intended to divert Russian attention. Meanwhile, Ukrainians attempt to encircle Korenevo with a flanking maneuver by mobile units of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. This, however, brings little improvement to the situation, as Russian forces continue to hold the key ground in the city. The VKS Motor Rifle Regiment here is reinforced by the elements of 810th Marine and 128th Motor Rifle Brigades. Russian attempts to strike the Ukrainian salient from the north, in the direction of Malaya Loknya, with combined forces of 11th Air Assault and 810th Marine Brigade, are inconclusive. This is likely due to at least a fraction of 80th Air Assault Brigade being redeployed here from the area of Sudzha sometime before this moment, which in turn allowed to free up elements of 82nd Air Assault for attacks north of Korenevo. On August 12th, Ukrainians finally break the resistance of the 810th Marine Brigade in Martinovka, routing them and capturing Mikhailovka. They continue advancing along the road from Sudzha, now facing the 217th Air Assault Regiment. However, more significant events unfold further south. Elements of the Ukrainian 92nd Assault Brigade are redeployed here to make a breakthrough on BTR force, pushing straight towards Giri. The plan appears to have been a surprise attack on Russian reinforcements gathering in Belitsa. Even though the column of at least 6 BTR force initially went unnoticed while traveling 20 kilometers, Russian drone operators eventually spot them near Giri. There, BTRs are ambushed by Akhmat Special Forces and make a decision to regroup and set up an ambush themselves. Judging by the attempt to hide BTRs in Giri's forest, the plan was to attack Russian forces when they are scrambled to mitigate a breakthrough. However, once spotted, the Ukrainian armor platoon faces a brand new Russian weapon, fiber optic FPVs. Developed shortly before the Kursk incursion, these drones, unlike regular FPVs, cannot be jammed and offer far superior image resolution. A swarm of these FPVs attacked the BTR force, destroying 4 vehicles with precise strikes on vulnerable spots. This occurs simultaneously with BTRs engaging Russian reinforcements rushing to the village. One additional BTR-4 is destroyed by the autocannon of the Russian BTR-82, and another is captured intact, bringing total losses to 6. For Ukraine, this represents one of the largest one-time vehicle losses in the operation. Thanks to the armor, most occupants survived, but the Giri assault marks the turning point. It becomes clear that fiber optic FPVs are a formidable advancement, and they will play a significant role in how events will unfold on this front line in the future. On the western flank of the salient, elements of the Russian 810th Marine Brigade are now seen in Kremennoye, significantly reducing Ukraine's chances of enveloping Korenivo. Instead, focus likely shifts to Snagast, south of major city. The Ukrainian HIMARS systems also begin targeting the bridge in Glushkovo, since collapsing it will significantly degrade logistics for the Russians here. Besides bridges, GMLRS rockets are also used for counter-battery fire and destroying command posts, significantly reducing Russian capabilities to counterattack. After the first week of offensive has passed, we can draw the first conclusions and infer what is the goal of the operation. First of all, Ukraine has managed to capture around 1,000 square kilometers of land and 74 settlements inside the Kursk region in 1 week. This far surpasses not only modest Russian gains in the Kharkiv offensive in the last 3 months, but also months' worth of Russian gains in Donbas. What Ukraine demonstrated is nearly perfect blitzkrieg, deemed impossible in the drone era. All is due to careful analysis of past mistakes, new approaches to the operational secrecy, logistics, demining, as well as careful choice of a place of advance. Ukraine has also managed to capture hundreds of prisoners of war, with estimates reaching as far as 800 men. These include around 250 conscripts that are not supposed to participate in active combat, as well as Chechens, who, you guessed it, are also not supposed to participate in active combat, so these categories are extremely valuable for the further prisoner exchanges. Many speculate that the purpose of the operation was to capture Kursk nuclear power plant, the city of Kursk, or at least reach Rilsk. The first hypothesis is even supported by the Russian Ministry of Defense, which officially claims that Ukrainians plan to blow up the power plant after the capture. The credibility of this statement, however, is undermined not only by reputation of Russian Ministry of Defense, but even by the fact that on the map they made, half of the Ukrainian units are placed in wrong places. Even a non-existent 88th Mechanized Brigade, that in reality was 80th Air Assault, is present. It's true that we don't know the real goals of the Ukrainian command, but claims about plans to capture specifically Kursk, Kursk nuclear power plant, or Rilsk are not supported by any evidence at all. Judging by modest forces involved and multiple multilateral attacks, we infer that the plan was to capture as much Russian land as possible, take foothold in some solid strong points such as Sudzha and Korenivo, as well as local high grounds, and force Russians to pull forces from Donbas to fight an uphill battle on their own land. Among additional benefits of the offensive, there is a significant morale boost, further escalation that should speed up approval of strikes on Russian land by Western long-range weapons, as well as prisoners of war that can be exchanged. Other speculations look more like intentionally setting an unachievable in current circumstances goal for the offensive to declare it failure as fast as possible. Coming back to the battlefield, on August 13th, Ukrainians continue attempts to cross the Krepna river near Korenivo, but apparently these attacks are curbed by the abundance of drones. Korenivo is also reinforced with elements of the 98th Air Assault Division, which was stationed nearby before the incursion, including the drone unit Bobor. Across the salient, Russians capture a few Ukrainian damaged vehicles, which indicates that these were abandoned likely in an attempt to consolidate positions. Both Russian and Ukrainian aviation continue to conduct airstrikes, while both sides try to fortify their new front line. Colonel General Alexei Dumin is appointed as the head of the Russian operations in the Kursk region. Being Putin's assistant, he never participated in any major military matters, usually serving in administrative roles, which rather shows that Lapin will continue his destructive command, while Dumin will just serve as a conduit of information to Putin. On August 14th, 14 operatives from the Ukraine's SBU Alpha group captured another 100 Russian soldiers, mainly from 488th Regiment and the 204th Specialized Regiment Akhmat, inside the network of fortifications in Gordievka. Meanwhile, elements of the same unit fled or surrendered en masse in the encircled eastern sector of Sudzha. With this, it's now clear that Ukrainian forces have secured full control of the city. These repeated surrenders show that despite deploying various reinforcements to the region, Russian forces lack effective coordination with isolated garrisons left behind as Ukraine advanced. Hidden in elaborate fortifications, both elite and regular Russian troops have been effectively cut off and abandoned. Ukrainian troops typically give them a chance to surrender. If they refuse, a few grenades finish the job. The soldiers of the Ukrainian column of BTR force that was destroyed in Giri were not routed and took the foothold in Kamyshinoye, where they engaged in brutal combat with Russians. Some gains are also made around Sudzha, which further allows the city to turn into an anchor of defense and logistical hub, despite the arrival here of the 15th and 200th motor rifle brigades. The advance also continues to the south of Snagast. Ukrainians again target Russian logistics by seriously damaging the bridge in Glushkovo with HIMARS rockets. The still present degree of confusion about who holds what positions allows Ukrainian Special Operations Forces to continue acting in the intended manner. They actively infiltrate Russian lines and make ambushes, increasing adversary losses despite frontline stabilization. Of course, it's only relatively stable, but still doesn't look like one in Donbas, where industrial cities and fortifications force things to resemble World War I. In Kursk, Ukrainians, just like Russians, still make raids, using a less urbanized environment and forests for maneuvers. However, these become progressively more and more risky, which is illustrated by both Russian and Ukrainian ambushes on each other's vehicles. This also means that any maps, including our one, can hardly reflect to the fullest extent the real state of combat. Thus, it should be viewed with a pinch of salt, as it only reflects the area Ukrainians control with the highest probability, and doesn't show each and every raid and contested territory for obvious reasons. On August 16th, all eyes continue to be on the western part of the salient. Here, the same river works as a solid defensive line, but also creates a few bottlenecks in logistics. For this reason, Russians start retreating from the western part of Tyotkino, blowing up the bridge. However, this is not enough. Ukrainian aviation conducts a precise airstrike with guided bombs on a damaged bridge near Glushkovo, finally collapsing it. The Russians quickly start establishing a pontoon bridge to the east of the destroyed one. The Ukrainians meanwhile conduct an airstrike on the bridge in Zvanoye, heavily damaging it. Overall, Ukrainian aviation starts conducting more airstrikes on Russian territory with guided munitions such as French Hammer bombs, American GBU-39s, and JDAMs that are more effective against bridges than GMLRS HIMARS rockets. On August 17th, Russians continue to use Iskander ballistic missiles, targeting HIMARS and M270 MLRS long-range systems. While one HIMARS was indeed taken out in Sumy region, judging by the secondary detonation of munitions filmed by the reconnaissance drone, in the second strike, Russians actually destroyed an inflatable decoy instead of the real vehicle. The concentration of many such decoys near Kharkiv already helped to divert Russian attention prior to the Kursk incursion, and now the placement of many such decoys in the Sumy region quite effectively wastes Russian high-precision weapons. This, however, does not mean Ukrainians suffer no losses due to Russian strikes. The drones put strain on logistics and also curb many Ukrainian tactical attacks, resulting in an extremely rare situation where Ukraine ends up losing more equipment than the adversary. From the Russian side, mostly infantry assaults continue across the whole front line, especially in the area of Malaya Loknya. There, 95th Air Assault Brigade consistently repels Russian attacks and regularly counterattacks. On August 18th, Russian forces on the southern bank of Same River apparently start feeling the pressure of closing Ukrainian troops, who capture Snagast. They, first and foremost, prioritize the immediate evacuation of phones and other possessions of value from Glushkova stores, apparently to prevent a possible capture by the enemy. Jokes aside, the acts of pillaging by Russian forces in the Kursk region are not different from those seen in Ukraine, so we will mention them just once. The same is true for a long list of war crimes, which will become progressively more common in a few months and will mostly manifest themselves in executions of Ukrainian prisoners of war, especially by Russian Marines. Some elements of them, in the form of the fraction of 155th Marine Brigade, are deployed here as well. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian command too carefully continues to deploy scarce reserves to gain just a little bit more land. Here, the 501st Separate Marine Battalion captures Apanasovka, further creating pressure on the Russian forces on the southern bank of the same river. On August 19th, the third and last bridge across the same river is heavily damaged by Ukrainian aviation. In addition to that, with Marines now supporting the advance, the area of control is expanded into Vishnyovka. This way, the area south of same river is further isolated and is supplied only with pontoon bridges. Moreover, these still act as logistical bottlenecks, which allow Ukrainians to quite effectively catch multiple pieces of Russian equipment there, and destroy them with FPV drones and GMLRS rockets. Ukrainian airstrikes reach not only river crossings, but also Russian command posts in the eastern part of Tyotkino and Glushkovo. On August 20th, Ukrainians reached the same river by capturing Krasnooktyabrsky and consolidate their positions to the south. Near Korenevo, Ukrainians still firmly hold the outer perimeter of the city, but are likely expecting the counterattacks by the garrison. This is why they start thoroughly mining the streets with drones, and this has certain effect. In a video published by Russians, 2 vehicles in a column are destroyed by something that was claimed to be a new, precise Russian bomb capable of tracking moving targets. The other video, however, shows that one of the vehicles is a Lov van in Russian-controlled area, so the column in fact was not Ukrainian and simply hit landmines planted by drones. To the west, Ukrainians continue airstrikes on Russian positions near the heavily damaged bridge in Zvanoye. Even redeployment of the elements of the 5th Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade here does not help. It's also a good time to revisit the northern and eastern parts of the salient. There, throughout a week of active combat, Ukrainians have managed to secure quite a few positions, now not just contesting but controlling a significant salient towards Kauchuk and engaging in heavy combat inside the village itself. A few active advances towards Nechaev also create tough conditions for the elements of the 810th Marine Brigade, who quite successfully tied Ukrainians in combat in Malaya Lokny, but are now close to being encircled. The front line to the east of Sudzha continues to resemble a stable arc from Martinovka to Borki. Russians conducted multiple assaults on the Martinovka, but Ukrainians have managed to repel them all and even counterattack, entering Russkaya Konopelka. The heavy combat there is apparently confusing not only for spectators, but also for participants. In the town engulfed in flames, Ukrainian forces clash with Russian paratroopers of the 11th Air Assault Brigade and other auxiliary forces in brutal urban combat. Ukrainian Cossack MRAPs and M113 APC are seen delivering infantry that takes a foothold in the town. Suddenly, the Russian BMP-3 appears out of the smoke and splits Ukrainian forces. It first tries to destroy M113 that hastily retreats, but misses every shot. After that, the Russian BMP-3 turns around to take out the Ukrainian Cossack 7 MRAP that is similar to the M113, simply has no weapons capable of penetrating the Russian vehicle. However, the Russian BMP-1, which also suddenly appears on the intersection, also tries to destroy the Ukrainian MRAP, approaching it from the left side. The driver of the MRAP starts quickly reversing, as it has nothing else to do. Suddenly, the Russian BMP-3 opens fire at the MRAP, despite the friendly BMP-1 blocking the side, tearing the friendly vehicle apart. Looking at how violently BMP-3 destroyed that BMP-1, it seems like it was misidentified by the crew as an enemy, since the BMP-1 appeared from nowhere and stayed perpendicular to BMP-3 without showing the big V symbol in front. The unexpected combat between 2 Russian BMPs allowed the Ukrainian MRAP to escape for now, and its crew is dropped off at nearby houses. The vehicle itself is later destroyed by drones, same as 2 other Cossack 7 MRAPs that entered the town, but infantry was successfully delivered to positions, with Ukrainians losing only 1 man killed and 1 wounded according to the footage. This engagement highlights how chaotic urban combat, especially involving multiple vehicles, can be. Moreover, since drones are the primary weapon used to destroy an equipment, the engagement described above can indicate that crews simply are losing skills associated with vehicle-to-vehicle engagements. At this point, there are quite literally thousands of drone strikes for every pure vehicle duel. By August 21st, to the south, Ukrainians also capture Kolmakov and Panasevka. Even near Korenevo, they achieve important gains by taking back Kremennoye. This is possible due to the 810th Marine Brigade shifting its focus to Kauchuk, where their quite ambitious counterattack ends in disaster. The Marines are encircled and suffer heavy casualties. Overall, the Ukrainians revitalized the offensive to some extent, despite numerous Russian reinforcements, drones and aviation. Working in tight coordination with artillery units armed with HIMARS and M270 MLRS, the Ukrainian 8th Special Operations Regiment locates the Russian river crossings around Glushkovo. First, operatives employ FPV drones to take out exposed engineering equipment. Then, the crossings are hit with regular GMLRS rockets that destroy the bridges. Finally, the cluster GMLRS rockets are used to finish off infantry, completing the task of cutting off Russian logistics again. Despite such textbook operations, Russians continue to build bridges right under the strikes to persistently maintain at least some logistics across the river, despite losing men and equipment. On August 22nd, Ukrainians capture Komarovka, continuing pressure on Glushkovo. The way of Ukrainian troops here is consistently cleared by aviation, which continues to target not only bridges, but major Russian fortifications and strong points, such as 1 and 2 Muzhitsa. Russians, meanwhile, push the adversary out of Nechaev with forces of the newly arrived Arbat battalion and bring the 2nd Spetsnaz brigade to the eastern flank of the salient. Despite these reinforcements, it's fair to say that both Russians and Ukrainians are running low on reserves to achieve new breakthroughs. This, however, does not mean that forces are even somewhat equal, as the Russian grouping of forces north numbers around 70,000 men, which are split between the static and deprioritized Kharkiv front line and Kursk incursion area. Even very rough estimates indicate that against approximately 10 to 20,000 Ukrainians, here Russians concentrate somewhere between 30 and 50,000 of theirs, by far not the worst troops. Surprisingly, in terms of equipment, which Ukrainians were losing quite actively due to drones and need to advance, there is certain parity with Russians, who suffered enormous material losses in the past years of conflict. As of now, Ukrainians in absolute terms have lost more in the course of incursion, but this is soon going to change. Since August 23rd, the battles continue but do not bring either side much territorial gains. While Ukrainians are likely again forced to retreat from Kremennoye, the 225th Separate Assault Battalion advances to the north of the village, crossing the river and capturing a number of Russians in the area of Durovka. Some evidence suggests that Ukrainian troops are present even further to the north and are blocking the railroad that leads to Korenyevo after taking a foothold on the northern bank of the Krepna River and on the outskirts of Alexandrovka. This, however, does not degrade the Russian logistics much, as the main supply routes enter the town from the west and the complex terrain with rivers prevent any possibility of fast encirclement. As we have seen, the rivers are not much of an obstacle for Russians, and they have plenty of pontoon bridge layers and quite skilled combat engineers who yet take massive losses from time to time. For example, on August 28th, the Ukrainian 8th Special Operations Regiment again locates and destroys 6 pontoon bridge layers in just one spot near the front line. The already assembled pontoon bridge is also destroyed in the area of Zvannoye by HIMARS using intelligence provided by the 14th UAV Regiment. By the end of month, Ukrainians also reclaim some positions around Cherkasskaya Porechnoye and again take a foothold in Nechaev. Russians redeploy to Kursk a few extra units including Veterane Assault Brigade. This is the latest out of the whole list of units such as Arbat Battalion, 1428th Regiment, Petnashka and 11th Air Assault Brigades that were removed from the hottest Pokrovsk direction to mitigate a Kursk incursion. While this is not enough to immediately halt the Russian advance there, Ukrainian soldiers note a certain relief compared to earlier months of battles. On September 1st, Ukrainians somewhat improved their positions near Malaya Loknya due to prior advances to the east and west in the area. The newly formed 152nd Yagor Brigade is deployed closer to the salient, but it's not enough to significantly affect the situation where both sides consolidated positions and arranged solid drone reconnaissance that prevents any deep breakthroughs. Around September 4th, Ukrainians start to realize that with current forces, even a partially cut-off Glushkovo area is impossible to take. Nevertheless, by September 9th, the last bridge in this area near the town of Kharkiv is destroyed by Ukrainian JDAM-ER glide bombs. On September 10th, the 14th UAV Regiment splits up, as a separate 413th Unmanned System Battalion is formed. One of the first targets of the new unit is a rare Russian remote mining system, Zemlyedelye in Glushkovo, which is destroyed in cooperation with the newly arrived 78th Airborne Assault Regiment on September 12th by directing a HIMARS strike. The 14th UAV Regiment also continues work providing information and showing HIMARS strikes with cluster GMLRS rockets on Russians near the various river crossings. As a month has passed since the beginning of the operation, both sides are further fortifying their positions, fully embracing static warfare, just in the other sectors. Overall, a relatively small Ukrainian grouping continues to tie down a Russian force several times of its size. Now on the defensive, Ukrainians are, as elsewhere, focused on maximizing adversaries' losses. Meanwhile, the Russian command is likely facing increasing pressure from political leadership to bring an end to what they had previously characterized as a minor raid by sabotage and reconnaissance groups. This leads to a gradual intensification of brutal assaults, carried out with a little regard for losses. These efforts are clearly visible as Russians begin attacking in large mechanized columns, something not seen since the Battle of Avdiivka. This shift indicates that Kursk front now receives priority equal to or even greater than the Pokrovsk area, as Russia now commits the modest remains of its equipment to reclaim its own territory. As a result, since early September, the previously unfavorable ratio of equipment losses for Ukraine begins to shift closer to 1-to-1, and as we began this story with Operation Seneca, it makes sense to finish this chapter by coming back to it, following phases 1 and 2, diverting Russian attention prior to the attack and concealing the scale of the offensive as long as possible. Ukrainians move into phase 3. Since August 15th, Ukraine has established the military commandant's office of the Kursk region, headed by Major General Eduard Moskalyov. This office oversees execution of plans devised by Ukrainian psychological and informational warfare centers to build communication channels with local civilians. This includes first and foremost thousands of Russian citizens receiving the means necessary to continue their lives in areas now under Ukrainian control. This often overlooked effort has led to the complete absence of civilian resistance or partisan activity, in stark contrast to 2022, when Russia's invasion of the Sumy region nearby triggered widespread sabotage and the destruction of hundreds of vehicles by local partisans. No such movement have emerged in Kursk. Furthermore, international journalists have been granted access to the area, and this reporting has consistently reflected an atmosphere of relative calm and coexistence between local civilians and Ukrainian forces who continue their operations along the entire salient.